everybody, welcome to Black Spring. And today, you might remember the issue of the Swedish girl that's pictured here. She was actually Time Magazine's Person of the Year in 2019. You might remember her global campaign as a climate change activist, as well as her campaign Skip School Fridays. Also, I've referred to her here many times on Black Spring as the UN agent of change because there again, children are agents of change according to the UN's agenda and their goals going forward. So with that, if you don't remember that, you may remember a critical UN speech in which she cited ecosystem collapsing, mass extinctions, and she also criticized world leadership and also her own personal hopelessness and despair from these mass extinctions or climate change effects. So she also has a famous quote that you might remember, and it's, "How dare you? How dare you look away? How dare you not listen to the science and to respond to the earth?" So with that said, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to take you to our story today, which comes to you from our very vetted source, the New American. If you will go with me here on Black Spring, I'd like to thank everybody for being here. Now, this is entitled Tortured Logic, Connecting the Pandemic to Climate Change, written by James Murphy. Now, having been knocked from their perch, at least temporarily, as the #1 existential threat facing mankind by a pandemic, the climate alarmists have taken to comparing the two crises, quote, crisis, and how the citizens of planet Earth can learn how to tackle so-called climate change from how we've tackled the pandemic. Now, all it takes, you see, is a hefty dose of authoritarianism. And of course, our Time Magazine Person of the Year, Greta Thunberg, climate activist, sees a direct connection between the response to the corona pandemic and how governments should attack climate change. Quote, "The response to the virus shows one thing, that once we are in a crisis, we can act to do something quickly, act fast," end quote, said the 17-year-old Thunberg, who believes that both she and her father contracted the pandemic, though neither was tested. Quote, "Though it must be in a different way to how we have acted in this case, we can act fast and change our habits and treat a crisis like a crisis," end quote, Thunberg stated. That's true enough. If governments continue to act in authoritarian ways, such as limiting movement and closing businesses, such as they have during the pandemic scare, but the costs of such action, both financially and to our liberties, are immense. Now, of course, I want to continue with this installment, but I will do a bit of paraphrasing here because it looks like from this article we have an example of worldwide or nation states climate activists making claims, that quote, "the pandemic is the cure, that humans are the disease," in a tweet that comes from the Extinction Rebellion, which is actually a global climate alarmist group. Now, of course, they're going to deny it. This article cites that they're denying that they are responsible for tweets and flyers. But of course, there's other things that contradict that talks about this particular XR account, Midland's account, has been followed by other XR groups over the UK. And if it is true that, quote, "far-right groups," quote, "placing the anti-human placard and manned the XR Eastland Midlands Twitter account was, as the main Twitter account for the XR in the UK claims, they've been sleeper agents disguised as climate alarmist for a while now. So you have other quotes throughout this particular article, which you can also read for yourself. But here it also gives examples of how, we've had other nation states, or in this case, the monarchy, which the Queen of England's husband, it cites here that Prince Philip made this pithy remark, quote, "In the event that I am reincarnated, I would like to return as a deadly virus to contribute something to solving overpopulation," end quote. According to this article, it would seem that whoever is manning the XR East Midlands Twitter account agrees with Prince Philip's Malthusian notions. So, with that said, it looks like we have climate alarmists worldwide that have been attempting to use legislation aimed at the pandemic to sneak in climate-related legislation. Of course, you have the Democrats that have attempted to, of course, already in our stimulus bill, they've tried to throw in, quote, the green projects, and of course hold the airline industry to, offsetting carbon emissions by 2025, and also throwing in more money in the bill to study carbon emissions in aerospace and da 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 da. Yes, so you have more of the Green Deal that showed up in our actual pandemic stimulus bill. And you also have another example, Chris Stark, the executive of the Committee on Climate Change, which advises the British government on climate issues. He believes that the pandemic offers a possibility for a fresh start in the way the world thinks about and manages climate. Quote, "The COP, which is the annual UN Climate Summit, itself will have to change, and the themes of the COP will need to be more driven by a green recovery," Stark said. So, globally, the question will be, do we lock in the use of fossil fuels in our infrastructure choices, or do we instead look to a green stimulus? Okay, so you have that coming from the U.S. government, and which, of course, also advising other leaders on the climate change or the climate crisis. And also you have an example here where it talks about the European Union announced today that any pandemic recovery plan needs to be consistent with, quote, green transition aimed at making the bloc, end quote, greenhouse gas neutral by 2050. And of course they are shouting out, they're putting notice that of 27 countries in the EU, only Poland is holding out on signing such a plan. So, of course, that President Trump also took us out of the actual Paris climate agreement, which, of course, didn't make President Trump very popular at the climate summit, at the climate summit. So there you go. You have more of the fear factor, the message of the climate recovery. So here's my take. This is another auspicious crisis for climate alarmists and nation states to promote climate change legislation, and also here at home, the Green New Deal. Now, of course, this by now you know of the Green New Deal. If you heard of it, it's a signature campaign, or it was promoted by AOC, that's Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and Bernie Sanders, a plan that was estimated around $93 trillion that promise or touts green new jobs, retrofitting buildings, eliminating fossil fuels, outlawing fracking, no airplanes, no cars, promises more efficient energy via sources of solar and wind power. Now, talk about not letting a crisis go to waste. But I think it'll be more interesting to see what the Republican responses are to the legislation and policies that come to the floor. After all, we do have bipartisan support from Citizens Climate Lobby Caucus, which Senator Lindsey Graham and Matt Gaetz are both a part of. So I submit as well on this issue that Ms. Thunberg is not actually Time Magazine's Person of the Year, but she is the agent of global taxation, not so much the agent of change. So, as usual, I'd love to know what you guys think in the comments and in your concerns. So please let me know what you think. As always, I'd like to thank everybody for joining me for this segment of Black Spring with Autumn. If you could also continue hitting the like, subscribe, share buttons, that helps with the suppression, of course, of conservative voices, and also helps with algorithms to bring this platform and more to the table. I'd like to thank everybody for joining me on this segment of Black Spring, and have a great day.